Good morning.
Morning, Nigel.
Yes, we're gonna talk English because our podcast is in English, but we're both Dutch, which is a bit odd, but still, we'll do it.
Yeah, well, we're used to that, right? We've been working for an international company together for a while.
Yeah, so it's not too hard to speak English for us. Yeah, we decided to discuss a book today, and
Yeah,
the good thing is you read the book actually, all of it, and I
well,
started it, and yeah, you got it right here. It's called
yeah. Well, just a little caveat though. When I say read, of course, I listen to them, but it's unabbreviated, so it's and read by the author herself.
ah.
So in this case, the full experience.
So you've been listening to Amy Edmondson's voice for the whole duration of the book, basically.
Yes, I did.
That's nice.
Yeah,
Well, the book is
I
called
did.
"The Right Kind of Wrong: How the Best Teams Use Failure to Succeed." So, why did you start reading the book or listening to the book actually?
Well, to be honest, it was because of I think it was a LinkedIn post that somebody made with 9 books in there, and you said, "Oh, I'm getting the right kind of wrong," and I was like, "All right, I'll have a look." So it's basically your own fault that
Ah,
we
yeah,
got here.
that's why I ordered it as well because I saw the title and I was very curious about where the book would be about. Um, Apparently, there is a good way of failing. That's what we got from it. So on the back it says, "This is not a book about failing less. It's a book about failing well." So yeah, interesting, right?
Yeah, but yeah, it is. I think that um, well, the main point basically being that there's different types of like being wrong or failing. Although I think, but maybe that's because we're Dutch. Failing is like a um, is a word with so much connotation there, right? Failing is really like a failure, and I think that in the end, like you don't fail unless you stop when failed, right? So I think that failure here is a it's a tiny bit different than we would use it in Dutch. But maybe that's just me. That could be. I interpret it. The word failure feels final, and I think that
Right.
especially in this book, it's about the failing multiple times in a process to success. It's just so. Um, I think I had to change my thinking to the failure from being final to being an intermediate stage of the process.
Yeah. So basically, when you if you translate it quite directly to Dutch, if you fail, it's the end of it and it's done. It's not repairable. There's no
Exactly. So it's a final in the sense that we have once you failed, yeah, you fail. That's what it is. And to a certain extent, of course, if you take this process and you do something like a very small step in that, and that fails to bring the result that you try to achieve, sure, that avenue, right, that path closes down, but that leaves the other paths that still lead to success. So I think it's like that tiny bit of difference when English is not your native language, where failure has a different sound. But I think that the most interesting part of the book is, and I think that's well, the title says that, of course, um, th- that there is that failure in search of success, but that there is a specific um, circumstance that you need to create in order to be able to fail correctly, to have that right kind of wrong.
Yeah, I think the author Amy is in the beginning of the book. She describes a situation in a hospital where she's learning about failure by researching some teams and how many mistakes they report. And uh, she learns. She had the idea that well-performing teams would have less failures than bad performing teams. So there is a certain extent of figuring out what is a good team and what is a bad team, but let's say we know that. And then she describes how the the teams that are proclaiming to be good performing, they report more failures and incidents than the teams that are said not to be performing well. And that was an interesting thing because it went against her expectations that good teams make less errors and bad teams make more errors. And then that didn't happen, so she had to figure out why that happened. And I found it very interesting to see that the effect of having the safety to speak up on making mistakes or making failures or is important in the report level. So the bad teams probably make more or even so much failures or mistakes, but just covered it up or didn't report them. So that bias was basically the first step of figuring out how to fail well, is to even know when you failed. So well, she is the world's leading expert on psychological safety. So I think here comes the caveat with that part, that without having that safety, you won't be reporting any mistakes because you're probably afraid of the consequences. So how did you get that from the rest of the book? How is the relationship between the psychological safety and the way you can learn from your mistakes?
Well, that's 100%. There's 100% link there, I guess. Well, 100%, but there's a one-on-one. The more safe an environment is to make those mistakes, the more likely it is that people will report on them, and of course that's a place from where you can improve. And I think that the whole discussion is about like the three failure types that you have. And one is just procedural error. I to be honest, I forgot the word that she used. She has a specific term for that. But it's basically if there's a procedure that you can follow and you don't, or something goes wrong, that's a certain kind of error. Yeah. That's not the right kind of wrong. That's obviously the wrong kind of wrong. Then there's another like error in more complex environments, but that is still known territory. So I think she made this distinction there. If you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, so you have to be in new territory. And then new territory can be defined in many ways, right? You can put that there. You have to minimize the impact of failure, right? So you have to figure out the smallest financial or whatever impact you can find, and then you do an experiment, then it can fail, right? And then I think that she even has a critique of the failing fast, well, let's say ideology.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that idea that if you embrace failure, you can fail all the time. But well, her argument is you shouldn't be failing in places where you shouldn't be failing. So things that are known territory that you could know if there's a procedure, don't celebrate failure there. Also, don't be too harsh on it, but it's not that failure that needs to be right celebrated. You don't do a failure party because you did something wrong, which you should not have done wrong.
No, I recall her saying, "Do your homework before you start failing, so you don't fail on the things that are well known."
And don't fail. Let's say if you can break it down into small pieces, and you fail like in the small pieces, so minimize. So there's the aspect of being in new territory, planned failures, not necessarily that you plan to fail, but that you plan for the event of failure, that your impact is minimized. Things like testing environments, doing something virtually before you do it real, right? Testing it in a simulation, testing it to 5 people before you do 100. Those kinds of measures should be in place if you want to be able to say that you've done everything to do the right kind of wrong, the right kind of failure. Yeah. And then it is good to fail But then it's not there to fail. It's not necessarily good. I don't think that failing is necessarily good in any situation. It's always better to succeed, but it's not there to fail if you're looking for an answer.
Yeah, I
So,
think
but
I had a feeling while reading the book that it resonates strongly in an academic world where this is part of your scientific um, progress. If you want to figure out if something is true, you have a theory, you want to test it, you design an experiment, and the experiment is called an experiment because you're going to experiment it, and the option of the outcome of the experiment could be that it's negative, it's positive, or you get more data to change your experiment. So I think in that context it's easy, but the examples you just give, that's more from an IT perspective, having testing environments or virtual environments or stuff like that. I think that's an example that could work in an IT setting. And then you can fail as many times as you want because you can
yeah,
start over without a big impact, right?
yeah. So sure, but there's always also the let's say for doctors, they let's say you do stitches and you do stitches first in a less like on pig skin, and so you can fail there, right? But the impact of your failure there is minimal, and then you progress into humans, and once you are in humans, you can go into arteries, and if you right, so there is that way to uh, learn from your mistakes, right, without causing a major impact. But she has a whole story in the book about a new like some new procedure for heart surgery,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that back in the day when the heart lung machine was developed, people died because of this. That those were well, really failures, but they were in a new domain. They were done in a totally controlled environment, and mostly on people that had no chance of surviving without this. But there was only one way at that time to go forward, and that was to really do it, right? And
Yeah.
that's when they tie up they take your heart out of the equation of your blood circulation, and they filter out the CO2 out of your blood, right? Um, that went wrong several times before it went right,
Yeah.
and that is a place where I guess that is the right kind of wrong, although there is human lives involved. But I think
Yeah.
also one of the things is any innovation. So it's not just, let's say, academic,
No.
but any innovation. I think that referring to space programs or SpaceX even, that you have to do 100 launches, right? And you do them as best as you can, and you minimize the impact. So you don't do a crew in there, and you do right. You do a small rocket maybe, or you do no payload, or you do whatever it is that you can do to minimize the impact of a potential failure. And then when it fails, yeah, then it's a lesson. And I guess that they also put a lot of things in place knowing that it might go wrong, or maybe even knowing that it will go wrong. But they do as much sensory data so that they can figure out how to make sure that it doesn't go wrong again.
Yeah. So that it circles back to the remark about doing your homework. I think these are areas
Yeah,
where if you do your homework, you still don't know because no one did it, and you'll have to
and
try
nobody
if it
knows.
works.
Yes,
And you cannot do a simulation on this. You cannot do it virtually. So heart surgery is something you'll have to do with an operating room and a scalpel and a patient that is already in a dire situation. I
yeah,
mean, the comment in
yeah,
the book about this doctor producing a lot of corpses, it kind of struck me that I said, well, this is a really finite way of experimenting. If you succeed, the patient lives. If you fail, the patient dies.
and
And in some
guys,
cases,
yeah,
the patient did survive the surgery, but then died of complications afterwards, which is also data. Okay, the surgery succeeded, but something happened
yeah.
afterwards, so we'll have to fix that as well. So they learned along the way, and that's the same with launching rockets into space. Um, so that's yeah, that's our these are really big examples, but on the day to day work floor, we might see smaller examples.
Yeah, I think so. But well, it depends very, very much on where you're at. If you're not innovating, then there's basically no excuse for failure. No, but then still, it's better to have the psychological safety of a situation where you can fail, where um, then there's room for improvement, right? And then everybody can learn. I think that in the book she also refers to like lean and Toyota's manufacturing, that they have this string in the factory that if you pull that, there's like 60 seconds of pause before they shut down the whole thing, and you have like 60 seconds or 1.5 minutes, I don't know, to figure out. Can you figure out what's wrong? Can you see what's wrong? Is it even a real mistake? Right? Sometimes you think something is wrong, um, and it ends up not being. But they are like, look, there's no false alarm. There's no boy who cried wolf.
No.
Anything that might be an error that increases our problems down the line, and this is a literal down the line, and because of the production line, they're like, no, let's we'd rather have 100 times an interruption, but no failures, than one non-interruption. It's like the fire department. There's no false alarms. They go out like it's a real fire every time. And I think even in their whole idea is that the more you practice dealing with failure or preventing failure, the more you can actually do it. So they see it as a drill.
Okay. And I
So
think
it
the
is
safety to pull that cord is very important, because if you know that if you're installing a door handle to a car, that's your job, and there's a
yeah.
cord which you can pull, and then everything stops from installing the engine to painting
The whole
whatever,
thing.
everything
Yeah.
stops, and you're standing there and it doesn't fit, and you go like, is it me? What? And you pull that cord, you really have to have that safety that the whole factory is going to wait for you because you couldn't
Yes.
install the door handle. I think that feels like a big responsibility. So you really have to figure out a way of making that person aware of the fact that the responsibility is the other way around. That if you don't put the door handle in correctly and you keep doing it for a long time, that's a bigger issue than pulling that cord and stopping the whole line.
Yeah, so I think they've mastered that at Toyota. I think the whole lean practice came from that, or they're closely tied together at least. And yeah, I think psychological safety is not an issue there. So if you don't have that, this will never happen.
So imagine we're in a leadership role in a company, and we have people doing stuff like, or working on a factory line or doing other things, and you basically want them not to make mistakes because they're going to be costly and you're going to have a hassle, there might be impact, so you don't want that. But you do want that because if there are mistakes, you want to learn from them because you read the book or you're listening to us, you go, yeah, we want to learn as well. So what kind of behavior should leadership show? And what might they be showing now? Because I think if you talk to leaders, they will always say, no, we embrace failure. But in reality, this is a big issue. That's the book about. And that's why Amy Edmondson has a lot of research potential going on, simply because this isn't the reality. We're not, if someone in politics makes a mistake, they usually have to step down. They cannot get away with, oh, I'm sorry, this is a learning opportunity, and we're going to move on. Usually the opposition is going to go, no, you have to step down. So the whole thing in our psychology, but also in the society, I don't think it's really built around the safety of making mistakes, right?
No, but I do think that I think that stems from the idea, especially in politics. Which is weird though, because they do a lot of new stuff too, or at least predictable stuff. But their failures are often on a larger scale. When you see that there has been like signals that it wasn't going as it should have, right? So I guess that they are held accountable, not necessarily for the mistake or the failure, but their behavior of ignoring it. Maybe, I don't know, but I think it's important for any company to be aware that there is a difference of the types of failure. I think one of the companies, well, the company I work for now, there was a remark by the Dutch CEO, and he said, "Oh, it's fine if you make mistakes." And there was a whole discussion about it in the hallways afterwards, right? Like, oh, it says we can make mistake, but does not allow all mistakes to happen, or he's not pleased with all mistakes. So they felt a discrepancy there, and I think that is because the intention of the CEO is to say, look, if you're failing in the right kind of wrong situation, of course you won't be faulted, but you can't make a mistake that is in known territory. There where there is already a procedure, it's not okay. Well, sure, it's okay to make a mistake. We shouldn't punish it per se, but it's not something to be applauded or there's something should be done. Look, if you do this, right? They have the donkey and the stone thingy. Oh,
I saw this diagram about the way failure is perceived, and the nice thing about it is that if it's blameworthy, it's considered sabotage in this model.
Okay.
If it is inattention, because you're not just paying attention, people are not too happy with that kind of failure. If you have an inability to do it, then you are starting to get into the point of, well, that doesn't really give you the blame because you didn't even know what to do. You should ask, but you didn't, so it happened. Now what? And then you move into there is a challenge, uncertainty, or experimentation. And then you get to praiseworthy failure, where you tried, that's good, and you failed, and we learned, and now we're going to move on with the new data, which is something we strive. So when in generic terms saying, but that's the intelligent failure, I think you've mentioned before. How do you figure out how you're going to tell your people, you can fail, but you have to do it very smart. We don't want to have like sabotage-like failure or inattentive because you're not paying attention. Those are, I would call them mistakes, maybe.
Well, in the book she had I think a chapter or at least a paragraph about, like, let's say you've been overworked and you make mistakes, like whose fault is that, or where would you put blame? And there is a lot of research going into that, and very, very, very often you see that blaming somebody for a mistake is never productive, right? So that psychological safety, even for mistakes that shouldn't be made, is still very important. Not to be too. You have to want to prevent them, and everybody involved has to want to prevent them. And I guess that if you go into any workplace, look, nobody likes making mistakes, not only for the consequences, but there is no, I don't know, there's nobody that is interested in making mistakes. They might be disinterested, right, at worst, that they're like, yeah, I don't really care. It's not my problem. It's not my money type of thing. And I think in the end, those kind of people, or that kind of mindset is not something you would want in your company. But all other people who are doing like the best they can, often you see that either people indeed don't get the training they need, they don't get the time they need, or they have overworked, didn't sleep very well. Whatever happens leads to that failure, and not so much the person.
Yeah, I can imagine that you can also look at it from the other way around. For example, what happens if you do not allow mistakes to happen? What will the behavior be from your people? They will try to they will still make mistakes because it happens, but they will try to hide them or cover them up. Or if they are in the area of experimentation or challenges or uncertainty, as in the diagram thingy just showed, they won't do it because they will feel like, well, it's an uncertainty, and if I proceed, I might make a mistake or I end up in failure, and I don't want that to happen, so I won't. That I think that passive behavior is something that for leaders should be the driver of creating psychological safety and allowing their staff, their teams to make those mistakes or have failures. Simply because the other option is they're not going to do anything anymore. They're just going to stick to procedures or standards or the things that they've always done. And they will spend a lot of time covering their butts, and then you lose the ability to do anything out of the ordinary, anything new, and then you get that kind of company.
It kills all innovation and improvement.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a bold statement, but maybe I used a little bit more words to.
No, but I think you're right. You're right. But it is the point that if you don't feel safe enough to figure out, and then we go back to lean, right? There is people that they're doing the job, and they're like, yeah, look, if I change the position of the screwdriver to that place, and then it might be like that tiny bit faster, right?
Yeah.
That then you go into a unknown territory, and you could be wrong, and it might be less efficient, and might take you more time to do whatever it is you were doing, or right, and that might impact the whole production process, because once you go really lean, right, anytime you that's like very everything's so tied together. It's very tightly coupled. So if one process takes longer, that might be a big problem in a later stage. So you do run a risk there. But I guess that they do that. They try that. If it works, they keep it. If it doesn't work, they revert back. It's basically a very well changed process. But you have to be accepting to the fact that sometimes what you try doesn't work. You have to go back either to the drawing board or back to where you were before.
I also think that I discussed it, the book and how you can learn from failure with my wife. She works in a pharmaceutical company in the quality area, and one of the things she runs into is that the demeanor about quality is that it should be right the first time. So you don't have a lot of wiggle room to make mistakes because quality is something that is not really negotiable. While at the end, she's trying to move into a situation where the quality is more like the Toyota example. It's an ongoing process, and it's more of a culture than following procedures. But for the traditional way of looking into quality, it's well, as Simon Sinek would say, it's a finite mindset. This is the quality, and this is how you should do it. While she's propagating a situation where this is the quality, but we're going to improve it because it's going to be improving along the way, anytime and every time. So you see it in a lot of areas. It's there. It's in.
But what's interesting though is that like if you go into like I did the Lean Six Sigma, right, and the Sigma is about production quality, right? It's about how many errors are in a million samples.
Okay.
So, but that is about first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about once we go into a production process, how many of these million that we create are correct and how many are not. And you can, I think you can have like 200 something failures per million before you reach the Sigma 6 level. And then you have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Sigma 1 is basically all of them are failures, and then you end up. So, but it's strange that both those things, right, Lean and Six Sigma, they work together to create a process where first time right is very high percentage, like 99.9999, very, very high, but they do that through continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that it's not two separate worlds at all. It's wanting to do it first time right, but I guess that if you want to do it right from day one, then that might be an issue. You can't, I guess, well, you can try to, but you can't engineer a process to be perfect the first time.
No, okay. So it's an infinite process. You should have the feedback loop of figuring out how to place your screwdriver differently to make the process even better while it's already in a very good state. That makes sense. And I think every situation and every dynamic has its own learning path on dealing with failure. I mean, I think the simple psychological effect about failing is that's one of the things I've seen a lot in my line of work, even working with you in our team, is that shame is involved. People are not happy to tell they made a mistake or they did something that created a failure or caused an issue. So and I think because I like the whole idea about learning from failure for a very long time. I've always asked people to talk about their last failure and just discuss it without prejudice, without telling them they did something wrong, or without the expectation that it should never happen again. It's just the fact that these things happen and they have a reason, and we can address the reason. And one of the things I just try to do is figure out what the underlying reason was, see if we can mitigate it, or we can build something around it, or get a learning from it, especially in an environment where we were in with not a lot of procedures, but a lot of different things going on. It was pretty hard to just mitigate all of the risk we were having. It was just a mindset we had to create to prevent outages by doing our job, basically.
But I guess if you look at it, if you take this book and you put us in the categories, nearly all failures there would be the wrong kind, because it is known territory, right? And I'm not saying, so still not blameworthy to any person involved here, because we as an organization are still learning, but I don't think any of those failures classify as the right kind. But well, I guess that the impact was also like nobody died or nobody even got hurt. So I guess it's all in the worst case a financial impact.
Yeah.
But sure, I do think that having the mindset that, well, sometimes you can even have the mindset it's new to us.
Yeah.
Right. So if it's new to us, then that's still the right kind of wrong if you try to minimize impact. Although it might not be new in the world, but there is that question. There is also that's I guess the gray area where should you rely on that what already exists, and where can you learn from the mistakes that you make yourself.
So it would be a more right way of doing it wrong if you would be able to expect it. You know you're going to do something that might end up a failure, but then it's more a planned failure or a predicted or something that you
calculated
maybe.
Risk. Yeah. Sure, but then still, I think we were in a there was not much real innovation going on in the sense of we were not doing things that nobody ever did.
No.
So I think that most of what we are and / were doing was in the area of knowns. It could be known because look, if you take a product, you go to the vendor, you go to their website, they even have like best practices that doesn't mean that they necessarily fit your situation. So there you might do some experimenting, right? And there could be some failures there. But I think, and not that they were really bad, but I guess if you really go into the book, you go to the letter. At best, we'd be gray area, but none of the failures were, I guess, truly the right kind of wrong.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, but also sets a high bar on what kind of failure you need to really make it a success story.
I'm an extremist, so.
But that's good. But also, you mentioned earlier in the fail fast ideology that you saw in Silicon Valley, basically, especially around startups. I found that interesting as well. That the author Amy has a critique on how that is being done in many cases, because they just create a business model and just launch it and then see if it works. And I think taking a little bit more time to plan it and to figure out if it's really a good product or service before you launch it is worthwhile. It gave me a little bit of hope, because I felt like if you have if you have enough money, you can just try a bunch of stuff and maybe something will succeed. Well, she basically said, well, it's going to be a waste of resources, and the chance that you will find something that works is still very small, because you don't give it enough thought.
Yeah, and failure for failure's sake is never the right kind.
No, okay.
I guess. Look, if aiming to fail is like succeeding at failing or something. That's a weird place to be. So I'm not sure if she put it directly in there, but I guess that there was I interpreted part of that critique like, look, it's good that you have it's fine to fail mindset, but failing for the sake of failing, it doesn't create anything, except for failure, of course. You can celebrate that and show you're not afraid of failure, which is that in itself is good, but
it is more the culture change. We're gonna create failure so we can celebrate that, so we can change the culture that we're not afraid to fail, but in the process you achieve nothing except changing your
Well, look, if you can take that to any other endeavor, right? If you can take the mindset to a new endeavor, then at least it's then we're in intermediate failure territory, which is good. Yeah, well, okay. So there, I think it was the whole theme of the book. I think it was interesting. I did think, however, that I think there was a lot of redundancy in the book. To be honest, I thought, well, not sure if it is worth a whole book, but that has to do with detail level, right? From a summary perspective, look, if you're not really into science of failure, let's say, then I guess a whole book is a lot of information.
Okay.
So if you're just into, like, I have a company and I want to figure out, right, like what to do with failure thingy, well, then a summary would be psychological safety, categorize your failures, and we're basically there.
Okay, well, that's good. I think it's up to any of the possible readers to figure out what the book will mean to them and how much of that detail level they want to absorb. So you can always skip a little bit, but yeah, I agree on that. I felt like a lot of the themes are being touched from different angles, and yeah, for some maybe after a few angles you get the idea, and others might want to have more angles on it. So that's good. I also felt like the book was filled with personal experiences and a lot of stories around how Amy came to conclusions. That's just interesting. But didn't really told me what the right kind of wrong then would be. But yeah, it's an easy to read book.
Yeah, and it's not too big, so it's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've kind of came to the end of reviewing this book. I don't know if you want to add anything to it.
No, I think well, it was good to listen to, and so it's harder to skip when listening. But no, I think it's worth the time.
So, and the time for whom you have? What would be the ideal audience for this book, except for the two of us?
No, well, I guess if you're in any way interested to be in a leadership position for well, in any leadership position, because mistakes are not only companies or any organization, right? So I do think that it's good to at least have a think it through, figure out how you could create psychological safety and what that means. It could be for any team, right? So I think any leader could benefit from this if you don't already have that distinction between the types of failures in your mind. I think anybody in a leadership position could have some positive effects.
Yeah, I can add something to that. I think if you are working with people and you feel like they are not living up to their potential, or they're not showing the initiative you want to see, or taking the ownership or whatever you want to see, it would be interesting to read the book, especially about the psychological safety, because it touches more than just a failure thing. It's the whole, well, as you strongly phrased it, it will kill your innovation. So if you feel like that's happening, you should absolutely read the book, but also invest more time in creating that psychological safety and figure out what you're doing not to create that. Because if you don't see innovation, you can basically conclude that there is not enough of that safety, I guess. So
that's I guess a good conclusion. That it's basically for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, the book is for everyone. I'm gonna give it to my kids now. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Thanks, Pim, and let's find a new book to discuss in the next episode.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Speak to you later.